So as you can already tell from the title of the video, we'll be discussing the topic of evasion for the class known as Sorceress, also known as Titties and Iframe. And the reason why is because the latest patch that we got regarding our passives. Sorc now has an all evasion rate of plus 10%, and because of this may raise some questions for those that are new or unfamiliar with the evasion to DR meta and what this means for Sorc overall. Some may already know what the answer is, and some may be confused if it's an option now or still considered a less preferable route for Sorc. That being said, I'll be covering all of these topics related to evasion Sorc. And on behalf of this video, I'll be getting major help and insight on these topics from someone who has a lot of experience when it comes to evasion gear on Sorc. That person is none other than Vixen. She'll be helping out with the information and general consensus on this topic, so special shout outs to her as well. So first things first, let's go ahead and cover all the raw percentages of evasion and accuracy that Sorceress has altogether. This will have multiple categories: the passives, the self buffs on activation, self buffs on target or hit, accuracy debuffs, evasion debuffs, and lastly our own self accuracy buff on hit. Now for our passives, we have 10% evasion. For our self buffs on activation, we have 15% evasion coming from abilities such as Flow of Darkness, Shadow Leap, and E-buff from Awakening. All of these three do not stack amongst each other. However, they can help to reset each other's duration timers, but only the larger timers can reset. The shorter timers do not reset the larger ones. Then we have these self buffs on target / hit, 4% evasion from add-ons, or 5% if you really wanted to use the tier 3 add-ons, but realistically you'd want to use the T2s instead. So with 10%, 15% and 4%, that adds up to a total of 29% raw self-buff evasion percentage. Then we have accuracy debuffs. Of course, debuffs will always be on hit. Minus 4% accuracy on targets from add-ons and minus 12% accuracy on targets from calamity. So a total of minus 16% accuracy debuffs if both are used. Accuracy debuffs for us technically is an evasion buff, since less accuracy for them means less effective they will be against our evasion. However, it will only apply to those targets, of course. Then we have evasion debuffs with minus 4% evasion on targets from add-ons and minus 9% evasion from B-Kick and Awakening's turn backslash. So if all used, a total of minus 13% evasion on targets. Once again, same idea. Evasion debuff is an accuracy buff for us. Less evasion they have, the more effective our accuracy becomes, but only on those targets who are hit. And lastly, our accuracy buffs. Shadow Kick with magic accuracy of 6% on hit and Raging Darkness with the same 6%. These do not stack, however, but only reset each other's timers. Then the E-buff for Succession and Awakening both offer all accuracy rate plus 12%. Honorable mentions would be the guild passives you can acquire. They do give you additional 5% accuracy and evasion. However, they both would technically cancel each other out, so it'd almost be redundant to mention them to the main or total amount of stats we have, but are still worth mentioning nevertheless. That just about wraps up our total percentages when it comes to our accuracy and evasion. These stats will help you better understand what you'll be working with in contrast to other classes, or even just, to keep a personal mental note of what kind of stats we're working with. When it comes to the general consensus of the overall evasion percentage and base stats after reworks, Vixen had this to say. Considering the upcoming class rework changes, Sorceress is going to be at the top of the evasion percentage stats. Analyzing self buffs, passives, and add-ons, she can reach up to 30% total evasion with a tier 3 evasion add-on here, surpassing even the likes of known tanky classes such as a Striker and Mystic that can only reach 24% roughly. When it comes to base defensive stats, she is still average though, not that great as Gauntlets, Ninjas, Kunos, or Corsairs, but definitely not that bad either. Overall in a solid position stat-wise. Obviously, more things come to the table when we speak about tankiness and damage mitigation, such as class v class damage modifiers and the ability to evade damage through iframes. And just as she said, our overall base stats is pretty average. There's a link to the spreadsheet you can go ahead and find in the description below. But here showcases our base melee, range, magic, and average evasion stats. And of course the ones in reddish colors are more so below average, while the ones in green are definitely above average. Anything in the gray section is basically average. And sure enough, Sorc's overall stats are all in a solid average range of 323, while Berserker, for example, is at a low 283, and Ninja is at a whopping 338. So we're pretty solid, not bad. Next topic we'd have to cover is the crystals themselves and the evasion gear. Since it's not just raw stats and percentages we have to consider, but also the crystal set affecting the evasion gear itself. The main crystals used in this case would be your 4 Whom setup and the Jin Harfio for the evasion. The Whoms give a bit of evasion on top of other useful stats, HP, and damage reduction, as well as Harfios will net you 40 evasion when equipped with 2. And if you wanted to include these special evasion crystals that are standard for chests, they also give you plus 20% of special attack evasion. Even the new Jin Glorious crystals give out the same stats but with added HP on top of that. And Lastly, the Garmoth added to your offhand that gives you yet another plus 10% special attack evasion. And if you really wanted to get sweaty beyond that, you could use even a Perfume of Charm that gives you plus 15 evasion and plus 10% special attack evasion with some HP bonuses as well. Basically a fuckload of special evasion if you really wanted to. But right now, let's go ahead and check this chart right now that pretty much showcases the different levels of accuracy to evasion and the push and pull between the interactions. The way this chart is designed is by the evasion level on the left hand column, with the top row showcasing different accuracy points. So for example, if I had 450 accuracy and I were to fight someone at 600 evasion, I would have about 95% chance of landing most of my hits. But if I had, let's say, 500 accuracy, but I fought against someone who was an 800 evasion player, I'd have about a solid 66% chance of landing my hits. The chart is pretty helpful and gives you an idea of how much evasion you would need in order for them to have a low or lower percentage chance of hitting, and probably a mental note of how much accuracy you think the opponent may have. So if you wanted to shoot for an evasion goal, this chart will tell you what that goal would look like and how it will interact with different accuracy levels. The link for this chart will be in the description as well. Here's what Vixen had to say about the range of evasion and how it feels at each point of its effectiveness. I'd say 700 to start having a nice feeling of an evasion build. You can reach something around this evasion without evasion accessories. It won't be OP tankiness, but you'll definitely have a better time on SA trades. 750 plus with evasion accessories such as centaurs and sea sails. Here you'll really start to feel tankier in 1v1s, small scale, etc. But you'll obviously lose some damage going this way. For full evasion DP builds, you can aim for 900 plus at the start and 950 plus for endgame DP. It's also worth mentioning that some classes won't feel tanky around 700 evasion and only with 750 plus. In some instances, classes like gauntlets can get away with only 700 evasion. It's still considered a low level evasion, or rather entry level, but I'd say 750 plus would be a safer bet when it comes to noticing any difference when it comes to tanking. Now before we head into the next topic, let me showcase some gear sets for you guys just so you can get an idea of what you'd need to achieve some of these evasion levels. First set is going to be the evasion armor sets of C13. Now keep in mind this is under level 62 character with all the journals done and completed. So as for the crystals, it's always going to be these special evasion crystals in the chest, unless you got the ones with HP, Harfia for extra evasion in the helmet, and Hooms for your shoes in Fiery Dandy, and Corrupted in the offhand, on top of C11 Fiery Kudum. And if you don't have a Fiery Dandy, then Hooms in your chest works as well. This right here is what you need to reach a solid 702 total evasion. Here are the evasion and accuracy stats to give you a proper idea. And if you were to grab yourself a lunar necklace, this is how your stats would change accordingly. And with this build, if you wanted to reach around 760 evasion, you could grab yourself a pen centaurs and give yourself exactly 762 evasion, and here are the stats accordingly. And if you really wanted to go beyond for evasion, you could swap out your necklace for a pen sea sail to give you that 801 evasion, and of course here are the stats accordingly. Next few builds will be centered around a C20 evasion build. Here you'll just barely have slightly under 700 evasion with this setup, and if you were to put in a lunar to help out with accuracy, this is what the stats would look like. Then of course putting in a pen centaurs would jump your evasion to 753. Next option you could do is to throw in the pen sea sail to maximize your evasion threshold to 792. With the according stats as shown. And with this you could hypothetically put the rest of your accuracies to pen level to up your AP and accuracy levels too. Another version of this build could be a mixed offensive style to offer a bit more accuracy, slightly more AP, and return for a bit less evasion. This build would now have 753 evasion with a whopping 501 accuracy. And if you wanted to go for more offensive than that, you could put on the Turos and keep the sea sail in distos to get yourself 301 and 305 AP. On top of still having 473 accuracy and 732 evasion. Then there's the ultimate build that includes ethereal earrings, Hasis rings, river necklace, pen Rick at C19, and centaurs with heaves as well. This build pretty much puts you at a fat ass 1008 evasion total. You may not have a lot of AP, but you'll sure as hell have 1008 evasion with 500 plus DP. Pretty much the full DP evasion meme build, but gives you an idea of how much you really could push evasion and DP if you really wanted to. But of course this leaves you with no AP to work with. Hence why it's labeled a meme, or rather a distraction tank build. Next topic that has to be considered, since this plays a big role and affects evasion heavily in today's meta. With that being said, the abundance of accuracy in the game. Plenty of access to accuracy comes in the forms of accuracy accessories from your belt, necklace, ring, earring, accuracy offhand of course. Then we have class passives that have solid amounts of accuracy to insane amounts of accuracy. Journals as well give out several amounts of accuracy. Alchemy stones give out accuracy. Foods and elixirs give out accuracy. Plenty of abilities and skills in the game have built-in accuracy, with some of them having up to fucking plus 50% accuracy. Not to mention some classes have recently gotten accuracy buffs from this rework on top that. Striker's Echo is one of them. But at the same time, from these reworks, there were a few classes that actually did get some accuracy nerfs, such as Sage, DK, and a few other classes, so that's also something to add as well. And as I mentioned before, any evasion debuff that classes have out there, pretty much accuracy increase indirectly as well. As you can tell, over the past year or so, the consistent increase in more accuracy through various different ways is worth mentioning, since it makes it much easier for the player base to acquire and obtain substantial amounts of accuracy to handle most evasion players way better than they could before. It's not to say it completely nullified evasion altogether, but rather means the threshold of respectable and effective evasion needed is going to be a lot more nowadays, and that means more silver investment in gear score to obtain these levels of evasion. As for PvE, evasion really only outshines DR in some endgame spots such as Olin's, Ash Forest, Monastery, and Crypt. It may not seem worth mentioning since most people don't grind out these endgame spots, Monastery excluded, but it's a nice thing to know for those that just so happen to have insane amounts of evasion and have the gear to grind these endgame spots. Otherwise, yeah, DR of course is going to be the choice of optimization for grinding every other spot in the game. And I do have to make one small disclaimer from my fellow Succession homies. So yes, a lot of these changes on the topics of evasion, realistically when it comes to after these reworks, are mostly going to pertain to Awakening Sorc. Let's be honest, these reworks were not too kind. They didn't do shit for Sorc outside of buffing its PvE mostly, really. So when it comes to evasion and Succession, Sorceress, not necessarily an option. When it comes to its damage, it's not enough to compensate. Its accuracy needs a bit more. There's a lot of things that Succession Sorc needs before we can even think about evasion. So yeah, once again, you want to know more, for those that don't already know, on Succ Sorc, I have literally 2 fucking big ass videos to discuss and, you know, mention the stuff with Succ Sorc. But outside of that, yeah, this really mostly pertains to Awakening Sorc, because Awakening Sorc did get a good majority of the buffs and changes to put it in a pretty solid spot for it to consider and to be a good spot about becoming evasion. Otherwise, yeah, this is just mainly for Awakening Sorc. Succ Sorc, unfortunately, can't really afford to think about evasion just yet. We're gonna need a bit more changes before we can go down that direction, but yeah, feels bad. And with all that info and topics covered, we can now dive into the general consensus of whether or not you should go evasion on Sorc after the reworks. So here's the breakdown. Essentially, you can go evasion if you have enough gear. As you clearly saw, 700 is the bare minimum for entry level, and the gear it takes to get that evasion respectively was mostly 650 plus gear score. So unless you have that gear score or more, it's not really an option for you. And let's just say if you do decide to go evasion, yes, evasion will do its work for the most part, since after that plus 10% evasion passive added with other variables, there is a better argument for the possibility of Awakening Sorc going evasion after reworks than there ever was in the past. But here's the uncertain variable we as the community have to wait on, that being the new damage Awakening Sorc will do now once the rework hits live. They got considerable buffs and damage overall, and the question begs, can Awakening Sorc's damage buff compensate way better in return for the evasion build? As you saw, you lost a bit of accuracy and damage going evasion builds. That building even accuracy to help compensate is mostly a necessity, and having that class alone have solid enough damage to compensate too is important as well. So in other words, we don't know if the new damage will be enough to compensate in a solid manner just yet, but we do know the evasion and defensive aspect of Awakening Sorc can mostly definitely dabble in evasion if the player has enough gear. But just as fair winning, don't be surprised if you do reach 700 to 750 plus evasion and still take lots of damage. As I mentioned, access to abundance of accuracy is a real thing, and plenty of classes deal more damage and have newer tricks up their sleeve after the reworks too. So that would be the main thing to worry about, outside of waiting for Awakening Sorc's damage to be tested in live server soon. But by all means, if you want to spice up your PvP life, go for it. But if you don't want to risk anything, staying DR is already the safest and smartest option for most Sorc players right now. You won't be missing out on an evasion build necessarily, since DR does consistent performance in both PvP and PvE. But yes, Evasion Sorc is now an option if you want to and have the gear score. Otherwise, not mandatory. And that finally settles this video on Evasion Sorc. Once again, special thanks and shoutouts to Vixen, the Evasion Carpet Queen of Sorcs. She helped out majorly when it came to lots of the information and fact-checking consensus of Evasion mixed with Sorc. She's had plenty of experience with going Evasion and DP builds with Sorc, so she's got a good understanding of Evasion builds and levels of optimization. Again, I appreciate you for helping me out with this one. With that being said, let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Are you staying Team DR, or is Evasion Sorc looking spicy for your progression journey? What are your overall thoughts of the Awakening Sorc's rework? And to my fellow Succession homies, stay strong. It sucks we can't go evasion yet, but it is what it is. Hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.